record. Okay, so it's October 8th today, a Tuesday, and our Crescenta Valley Group's program tonight is featuring Megan Liu, and she is representing Toxic Free Future. Oh, I'm sorry, that's one of my dogs in the background. Um, and she is going to be giving us a presentation on how to create a toxic-free environment. Megan is a resident of Seattle, Washington, and she is the Science and Policy Manager at Toxic Free Future, which is a national leader in environmental health research and advocacy. And Megan's going to be sharing some simple ways to protect us from exposure to harmful chemicals and discuss how policy and market initiatives can further help to protect us. So I'm going to turn it over to Megan, and I'm going to let her uh, tell us more about Toxic Free Future and everything that we can do to just protect ourselves better. Thank you for coming, Megan.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that introduction, Pat. I'm super excited to be here and talk to you all about tips on creating a toxic-free environment. Before I get started, I just want to make sure, can everyone see my slides okay?
That's a yes.
Perfect. Okay, well, sounds good. I will go ahead and get started then. So yeah, like I said, just today we'll be providing some tips on creating a toxic-free environment in your homes. I will start with a quick introduction, some background on why we are concerned about chemicals in our home environments, and then I'll start moving into recommendations on safer building materials, products in our homes, kitchens, and cleaning tips, and then kind of wrap up the presentation with some implications on change that's happening and change that's needed. Okay, so just to further introduce ourselves, Toxic Free Future is a national organization, like Pat just mentioned. We are based in Seattle, Washington, and we conduct research and drive strong laws and corporate responsibility to protect people from exposures to toxic chemicals. We were originally founded as a local grassroots group in 1981, working on environmental justice group or issues in Washington, and we've expanded to not only doing research and policy work in Washington state, but we now also have arms of our organization working in federal policy and towards market transformation. So not only do we want to just get rid of toxic chemicals as our goal, but we also want to drive government policy and markets towards safer products. We've been concerned about harmful chemicals being used in products for a really long time, so definitely have some tips that we can share, or I can share today to create safer homes. I will mention here, though, before diving into things, that while I can provide simple tips for cleaning and tips for switching to safer products in our home, in general, we can't shop our way out of the problem of toxic chemicals in our environment. And ultimately, what we really need are stronger restrictions on harmful chemicals and materials at both the corporate and government level, as well as the adoption of safer solutions. So I'll kind of touch on this a little bit later on what's actually being done to address harmful chemicals. But in the meantime, until we have stronger restrictions on what is actually allowed to be used in our market in the US, there are definitely tips that we can do in the meantime to keep ourselves safe. And so, just in case anyone is curious about particular chemicals of concern, I figured it could be kind of helpful to provide a little bit of background before we move into some of the specific recommendations that I have. And so, here is a chart of some common chemical classes that are of particular concern in products today. This is not a comprehensive list because there are a lot of chemicals out there, but just wanted to highlight a few that are pretty important to talk about. So you all on this call might be kind of familiar already with some of these classes since I think they do get talked about quite a bit. One of them is PFAS. The full name is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are known as forever chemicals because they don't break down in the environment or in our bodies. And so they're associated with a wide range of health concerns like harms to the immune system, cancer, thyroid effects, high cholesterol, and liver and reproductive toxicity. Um, PFAS is used for a variety of different applications, including industrial processes, stain protection treatments for paper and textiles, and nonstick coatings like Teflon. So I'll kind of circle back to some of these applications that I'm mentioning right now, but again, just to provide some background on the chemicals that will come up today. Other classes of chemicals that we're concerned about are phthalates, which can cause endocrine disruption and reproductive toxicity. That's primarily used as a plasticizer in PVC products, as well as vinyl building products, as well as cosmetics and personal care products, packaging, and sealants. Another class I'd like to highlight are flame retardants, which shouldn't need to be used in the first place because there are plenty of safer alternatives that are available, and that goes for actually all the chemical classes I just mentioned. Flame retardants are associated with a wide range of negative health effects like cancer, reproductive and developmental toxicity, and so on, and are known for use in electronics, appliances, and insulation. A couple other things I'll mention are formaldehyde, which have been associated with leukemia. They're used as preservatives and so have been used in home furnishings made of wood, building materials, and cleaning products, and heavy metals, which have been primarily banned in the United States, but because they are naturally occurring, sometimes do still come up in household products. And interestingly, as part of the work that we do at Toxic Free Future, we'll do lead testing in communities throughout Washington where people can bring their household items and get them tested for lead. And we'll use a machine called an XRF machine, which emits X-rays, which will help us detect whether there's heavy metals in a product. And we've actually seen lead pop up in quite a few aluminum cookware items. And so I'll kind of bring that back up later in the presentation on how we can avoid harmful chemicals of concern in the cookware that we have in our homes. I would also like to take a quick minute right here just to highlight a new study that we produced at Toxic Free Future. This was actually just published in a journal called Chemosphere last week. In this study, we found that toxic flame retardants are actually contaminating Black plastic household products as a result of electronic waste recycling. We know that flame retardants are used in electronic enclosures like television casings, but we hypothesize that these products with flame retardants, so these electronic enclosures, were entering the recycling stream and winding up in everyday household items where we don't expect to see flame retardants. And so this study was really concerning because we found a flame retardant that's associated with cancer, as well as one that's known to build up in breast milk, in kitchen utensils, food serviceware items like sushi trays, and toys. And so why I kind of bring this up is that some of the recommendations I'll provide during this presentation will relate to what you can do to avoid some of these levels that we found in this recent testing that we did. And in the past too, our research has helped lead to action on addressing different harmful chemicals in products. And so kind of bringing this up as part of the introduction and background to who we are as an organization, because going forward, we do hope that this research that we just found, which has excitingly reached national news coverage and local news coverage, including CNN and Washington Post, we're really hoping that these findings will be able to use to advocate for safer policies at both the market, being corporate and government level. Okay, so moving into some recommendations. So to get started, I'll mention a couple things around safer building materials. However, I won't spend too long here because I feel like reconsidering your building materials isn't nearly as common or as simple as product changes you can do around the house. But this is an area of work that we focus on at Toxic Free Futures. So for anyone who is doing home renovation or is a home DIYer, I just wanted to mention some resources here that we have available to make sure that you are using the safest options for your building materials if you are in a place to consider this. Yeah. So I apologize for kind of the small font on this chart, but I essentially wanted to show this simple chart which illustrates and describes what different kinds of chemicals can be found in different building products. We essentially know that different building material products are associated with different chemicals of concern, such as formaldehyde in flooring or cabinets and insulation, or phthalates in vinyl and PVC building materials. And so this is kind of a really quick glance so that people can easily take a look and see what chemicals of concern are in different products. Um, but as a result, we know that there are safer alternatives that are out there. We don't need to have vinyl flooring that has phthalates in them or other chemical additives. And so, as part of our safer building materials work, we've been working on developing different resources that people can refer to. So, home DIYers, people who are, looking to replace things in their homes, but also people who are working as architects or stakeholders in affordable housing can refer to these resources that we have so that they can ultimately uptake safer building materials in people's homes. So just to highlight a couple of examples where you can make safer choices, include flooring. So we know that wall-to-wall carpet can have PFAS in its backing. We also know that vinyl flooring can have phthalates, and we also know that the production of PVC as a plastic is really dangerous throughout its life cycle because it uses vinyl chloride, which is a known human carcinogen. And I'm sure you all might have heard about this happening, but the East Palestine train disaster where the train derailed and spilled vinyl chloride into the environment, there's a ton of concerns around the production of PVC because of the chemicals that are used in its process. And so as a result, there are definitely safer options for flooring that are out there. Hard flooring can be healthier and easier to clean, whereas carpet can sometimes accumulate dust more easily. And so solid wood, bamboo, cork, and linoleum are all good options instead of vinyl flooring or carpet with PFAS. Another example is paint, which can contain alkyl phenol ethoxylates, also known as APEs. These are chemicals known to be hormone disruptors, which is really concerning, as well as volatile chemicals. So something that you can do instead of having paint with some of these concerning chemicals is looking for labels that say low or no VOC paint that's APE free and PFAS free. So you'll kind of see where I'm going with this. We essentially, look at product areas for building materials where we know that there are concerns, such as sealants, which can contain phthalates, and then we make recommendations on what could actually be used instead. So instead of sealants with phthalates, you can look for pre-compressed polyurethane joint seals or phthalate-free acrylic and latex sealants. And so lastly, on the topic of building materials, this really just is in general something to keep in mind if you are planning on replacing anything. And we have this resource called the Healthy Materials Matrix that is stored on our website. And so it's essentially this chart that goes through every building material category, then lays out the chemicals of concern, and then lists our recommendations on what else you can use. So if you are in a place where you do want more information on this, I think this resource is really helpful. And something that I particularly like about this resource too is that we measured the cost impact of what it might be like to switch towards a safer alternative. So in this example right here that's shown on the screen with flooring, you'll see that there's only $1 sign. So it actually doesn't cost anything to switch to something that's safer compared to composite wood flooring or flooring made with PVC. So yeah, all to say with building materials, it's not to say that everyone needs to make these changes right now. It's just, again, if you are in a place where you're thinking about this is great. But there are, again, much simpler ways to keep your home safe from potential exposures from building materials, and things as simple as doing regular cleaning of your home, like vacuuming, dusting, and mopping, and keeping your homes ventilated with fresh airflow. Those are all things that can really help because we know that chemicals can leach into our environments, but simple cleaning steps like that are also a really good way to address things if you aren't looking to replace any building materials. And so moving into safer products, I have a few examples of things that you can do to move towards safer products that don't have toxic chemicals in them. One really good way to do this is using products with the EPA Safer Choice label. So Safer Choice, which some of you might be familiar with, is an EPA program that certifies products that don't contain chemical ingredients harmful to human health and the environment. And this is one of the best clean product labels out there because they actually look at all the ingredients in the product and make sure that they're safe. So looking for products with this label can really help minimize any potential exposures you might get to different products. And what's really neat is that there are a lot of products that actually have this label. And so just a few examples include all-purpose cleaners, dish soap, and laundry detergent. And so if you do want more information on this, you can actually access a database on the EPA website at this link shown on this slide. And you can search up different products that you want to or you're curious about purchasing in the near future. But you can also just go to a store and keep an eye out for some of these safer products as well. And then for some of you who have children in the home, there are definitely some tips here on ways that you can create safer environments for them. And so I'll kind of start with some general children's products. Previous research that we've done at Toxic Free Future has actually found that flame retardants can be used in the foam of children's nap mats, which then can contaminate air and dust. And then young children can be exposed to toxic flame retardants when they breathe or ingest the dust. And so in the study that we did, we actually found that switching to nap mats that don't contain toxic flame retardants can reduce the levels of flame retardants in dust by 90%. So that's pretty significant. And since then, there's been bans on these products. But in general, when you're thinking about things that your children might be using on a regular basis, trying to avoid products that are made with polyurethane foam is really important because that can tend to have toxic flame retardants. And also making sure that products are not labeled with California's TB 117 flammability standard is also really important because if it has that label, it's very possible and likely that that product might contain toxic flame retardants. And then to continue on with a couple more recommendations around children's products, safer toys is definitely something that families can look to move towards. Um, I know it's really hard to avoid toys made of plastic. I feel like they're everywhere, they're super common, but when possible, avoiding toys that are made of plastic that have certain harms, such as, again, PVC plastic, which are known to have a variety of different toxic additives in them, and again, are made with dangerous chemicals. Trying to avoid PVC at the least can really significantly help potential exposures that children might have to toxic chemicals in their toys. And so when it's possible, finding products that are plastic free is definitely a good way to go. And safer options can include things like wooden toys or cloth dolls or plush toys and games or puzzles that are made of paper. Some other things that can be done too are finding kid-safe art supplies, so avoiding solvent-based products like permanent and dry erase markers, mist from sprays, and dust mixes from clays or paints. These are all things that can be easily inhaled, and so kids might be ingesting some of the ingredients in those products. So when you can, try to keep an eye out for non-toxic labels on the products that you're purchasing and try to stay away from harmful plastics like PVC as much as possible. And then another product category I'll highlight before moving into things that you can find in the kitchen are textiles. So we have actually done our own research where we have found that PFAS is in textiles marketed as stain or water resistant. And so in our study, we had actually found PFAS levels in outdoor apparel, so clothing like jackets, tablecloths and napkins, as well as bedding. So some things that you can do here are look for products that are labeled as PFAS free or purchase selectively from retailers who have actually banned PFAS from their products. You can also make sure to choose products that are washable or also choose products that have third-party standards like the Oikotex label, which some of you might be familiar with. I will say too, with some of the third-party standards, not all of them are completely comprehensive and ban every single chemical of concern. But having these products with these labels is still a bit better than products without these certifications. So these can definitely be safer, but they could be missing some chemicals and some of their standards here and there. But I will mention here, since I know you all are based in California, California has actually banned PFAS in textiles. So starting in January of 2025, this shouldn't be an issue that you have to worry about. But until then, if you are looking for apparel or textiles, these are some quick tips that you can keep in mind when you're trying to look for things for your home. Okay, so moving on to safer kitchens. So I'm highlighting this as a section in itself because things in the kitchen are things that come into contact with our food. And we know that chemical additives can migrate out of the products they're in and into our food. So being a high risk kind of product category, this is why I'm drawing out kind of kitchen items in particular. Okay, so as for kitchen utensils, I know I keep kind of going back to this whole message of avoiding plastic because, again, we know plastic has a bunch of toxic additives. So instead of plastic kitchen utensils, wooden and stainless steel options are great. Again, here I'll mention our recent study that just came out last week. And again, we found that flame retardants are contaminating kitchen utensils through electronic waste recycling. And we know that chemicals like flame retardants that we found are actually able to leach out of kitchen utensils and into the food that we're cooking. And so, in order to reduce any potential exposure through ingestion to different chemicals, trying to avoid plastic in general is really good, especially for your food contact materials. Kind of same message here too. So our study had actually found toxic flame retardants in sushi trays. And so when it comes to storage containers, trying to use glass containers if possible rather than using Tupperware or plastic containers is best. I don't know about you all. I definitely came from, the mindset of trying to not be wasteful. So whenever I got takeout in black plastic containers, I would always keep those with me, but as I've learned over time that chemicals can migrate out of containers that they're in and into food, that's something I've definitely kept in mind, and I've made this change myself to try and not use plastic containers when I'm storing my food. Another item that you can make a simple change with are cutting boards. Using wooden cutting boards instead of plastic is a really great shift to do. A 2023 study had actually found that microplastics are released when you chop food on plastic cutting boards. And so this is really concerning because, microplastics can also contain chemicals, and we don't want to be building up microplastics in our bodies anyways, or microplastics getting into our food. So not using plastic cutting boards is also a really great way of reducing any potential exposures you might get to concerns around plastics. And then the last category or product that I'll mention under kitchen, safer kitchens, is cookware. And so stainless steel, cast iron, and ceramic cookware are definitely the safest options that you can opt for. Um, the reasons being that nonstick cookware can actually contain PFAS, because again, PFAS is often used in nonstick appliances. And like I mentioned before, through our community-led testing events, we've actually found instances of lead in aluminum cookware. And that's not to say that, everything has lead or anything, but it's because we've seen frequent detection of that, it definitely makes us wary. And we do know that stainless steel, cast iron, and ceramic don't have toxic chemicals in them. So these are definitely the safest materials that you can be using to cook your food and avoid toxic additives. And so now I'll move into some cleaning tips. So, as for safer cleaning products, there's a lot of options here. So, again, I'll highlight the products certified under EPA Safer Choice Program. Again, this is a super great way to avoid any potential chemicals of concern in your cleaning products. Avoiding products with fragrance or that are antimicrobial is also really beneficial. We know that fragrances can be associated with a bunch of different health risks. Some of the chemicals used to make fragrances can be allergens or hormone disruptors, or they can trigger asthma. And the whole thing here too is that with fragrance, there's usually not no there usually aren't laws that require disclosure of the ingredients that go behind fragrance. So there can be tons of chemicals in our products that we might not even know of that just are there for the function of fragrance. And so because there's a lack of transparency there and we don't know what chemicals are being used, that's one of the main reasons why avoiding products with fragrance is really important. As for antimicrobials, there are some antimicrobials that are known to be endocrine disruptors and are associated with developmental and reproductive harms. So, and some of these compounds can actually cause allergen sensitivity. So, this is also another reason to try and stay away from products that are antimicrobial, like triclosan. Some other things that you can do too, if you are pretty crafty and like to do DIY projects, you can use baking soda and vinegar for cleaning. So you can make these recipes at home for different kinds of cleaners. For example, you could do 1 cup of white vinegar and 1 cup of water, add that to a spray bottle, and you have an all-purpose cleaner that you can use. You can also mix baking soda with liquid soap and create a bathroom cleaner. And so if things like this are interesting to you, you can actually access more recipes on our Toxic Free Future website. And so we'll have some more tips on any DIY kind of safe cleaning products you might be interested in. But those are just a few to highlight. And I know this is going to sound super, super simple, but honestly, washing hands with soap and water is just really one of the most effective ways to remove germs. So regular hand washing and simple cleaning tips can actually really go a long way in reducing your exposure to harmful chemicals. And so the last couple of cleaning tips that I'll mention, again, we know that chemicals can accumulate in dust and air. So something that you can really easily do before you enter your home is take your shoes off and leave them at the door. We know that shoes can track in different chemicals from outside into your living space. And so this is just a really easy way to, reduce how frequently you might need a vacuum or just, tracking in all sorts of things from outside into your homes. And again, regular cleaning can also go a very long way. So vacuuming, mopping, wet dusting, and ventilation can help reduce chemicals building up in dust and air. So that's about it for some of our main recommendations we have on ways that you can create safer home environments. In case anyone is interested, I'll highlight a couple things going on in the policy and market world on what's being done to tackle harmful chemicals of concern. I have this chart here, which is by no means comprehensive of everything that's being done, but highlights a few areas that I've mentioned today during this presentation. And so it's kind of concerning when you think about like we have all these like things that we need to change or we have all these exposures that we're concerned about, but all to say too, it's not all doom and gloom, and there's actually things that are being done to address the toxic chemicals crisis. And so on the state level, there's a bunch of states who are super active in banning different toxic chemicals. Me being based in Seattle, I would like to highlight the Safer Products for Washington law. This is actually the strongest law in the nation that restricts and regulates chemicals in consumer products. And so we have an agency here in Washington that regulates different toxic chemicals and products on 5-year cycles. So every 5 years, they will restrict and regulate another set of harmful chemicals of concern. Beyond that, though, in other states, there are bans on a lot of the product areas that I mentioned today. So there's bans on flame retardants and electronics in New York and Washington State. California and New York both have bans on PFAS in textiles. So you ideally shouldn't have to worry about PFAS coming up in your textile items after 2025 in California. Phthalates in toys, those are banned in California and Washington. And Washington State also has a ban on lead in cookware. As for the market side, there's also a lot of retailers who are taking action to reduce toxic chemicals in their products. Retailers like REI and Dick's Sporting Goods have bans on PFAS in textiles. A number of national restaurant chains have bans on PFAS in food packaging. And then Best Buy and Apple actually ban toxic flame retardants in electronics. So these are all retailers that are kind of paving the way and showing that we can eliminate toxic chemicals and that other safer alternatives can be used instead. I also have a section on federal government, and again, not comprehensive, but really kind of bring this up because a couple of these things are things that came up today, like Deca BDE, which is a particular flame retardant used in electronics, which has been banned. Methylene chloride, I didn't mention earlier, but that is associated with cancer and was finally just banned recently by the EPA. And this particular chemical was used in paint strippers, so kind of important when we're thinking about building materials. And people have actually died from using this particular paints and coating removers with this chemical. So these were really, big steps. However, I'd like to highlight here that what we're really lacking in the United States is broader restrictions on chemical classes as a whole. And so the chemicals that I just listed here are just some that have been addressed, but they're only single chemicals that belong to broader classes of chemicals that have wider range of harms and effects on human health. And so kind of what we think, what needs to be done going forward. Toxic Free Future has what we call a framework called the four essential elements, which we believe will lead to the safest policy and market outcomes. And so, in order to fully shift away from toxic chemicals and move towards safer solutions, we need to have the following essential elements included in policies. So, that includes corporate commitment to stronger chemical restrictions and policies, having transparency, meaning that supply chain disclosure policies exist, and as well as consumer ingredient disclosures so that we know what is in our products. We also have an element called ban the bad. So this means that toxic chemicals and materials are eliminated, and this can be done, at the corporate level and the government level. And then lastly, the adoption of safer solutions, which will require definitions for safer alternatives and the investment and implementation of safer solutions. And by having all of these elements in policy, that will ultimately drive us away from the most toxic chemicals and materials and move us towards safer products and solutions, and ultimately protect the health of humans and the environment. And so that's almost about all that I have for today's conversation before I open it up for questions. A couple more things that I would like to quickly highlight. So just a couple resources in case anyone is interested is a retailer report card. So this is something that Toxic Free Future produces every few years. We actually have our next edition coming out this year. So what we do with the report card is we essentially grade 50 of the largest retailers in the US on how strong their chemical policy is. And so, what I think this resource really does is that it's a really helpful tool for people who are looking to make more informed decisions about the products they're purchasing, where they're purchasing them from. And you can kind of look up different retailers and see what kind of chemicals they're banning from their products. So, I think this is a super helpful um, resource to have, especially at a time when we are still lacking a lot of chemical regulation. And then one more resource I would like to plug our toxicfreefuture.org website. We have a wealth of information on chemicals and policies on our website that's super informative. So if you are curious about learning more about some of the chemicals I talked about, or even beyond that today, we have a bunch of chemical pages on our website you can check out. We also have a bunch of blogs with more tips on other things you can do to move towards safer products in your own life. We have a newsletter if you want to stay on top of regular updates from us and hear about ways to take action. And speaking of taking action, we always have a bunch of petitions up on our website. And I think this is a great way to make your voice heard because it does matter and it helps move towards change. And so if you are interested in signing petitions, you can check out our website for different petitions that we have going on. And just to highlight a couple of examples, we have one on telling the EPA to ban vinyl chloride, which again is that essential chemical that is a carcinogen that's made in the production or used for the production of PVC plastic. And so it's really harmful. We, of course, shouldn't have it being used or allowed to be used to make products or wind up in products. Also, to follow up from our recent study that I mentioned earlier, we have an action to tell the US government to negotiate a strong global plastics treaty. So, on an international scale, the Global Plastics Treaty is something that's happening this fall where different countries are going to come together and discuss ways to quickly and effectively address the plastics crisis, which could be really beneficial, especially in the context of toxic additives and how we're going to address that and turn off the tap on these additives from entering our environment. And that's about it that I have today. If any of you are active on social media and curious about following us, I have a few links here to our Facebook, our Twitter, and our Instagram. And I'm happy to answer any questions and just want to thank you all for listening and for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you, Megan. Could you go back to the previous slide with your social media? I was
Sure.
just trying to write some of those down. I know I have questions, and I'm sure other people do. If you would like to ask Megan a question, could you use the reaction button and just raise your virtual hand like this, and then I'll know to call on you. And I'm going to start it off with my first question, which is, and I'm really glad you pointed out about the black plastic. I should not, I have no need to hold on to anymore. Let's put it that way. So thanks for pointing that out. one of the questions I had about that was brought up recently, what about those hand sanitizers that you see everywhere? Don't they have microbial
Yes.
Yeah,
content?
that is a great question. So I, in putting this together, had actually just looked at that, and I believe that I think it was the FDA that actually banned antimicrobial ingredients in hand sanitizers. However, I think one of the issues that is still present in hand sanitizers are fragrance chemicals, actually. So if you look at some hand sanitizers, you might actually just notice that fragrance is an ingredient that's listed pretty high on the ingredient list, which means that it's pretty heavily used in that product. And so I think that's actually what the main concern is with hand sanitizer products today, rather than antimicrobials like triclosan. And so I think they're like one of the things that you can look out for is just trying to avoid hand sanitizers that have fragrance and make sure that they're alcohol based, and those will usually not have antimicrobials anyways. But again, I think they are banned at this point.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions besides me?
Well, how do we indicate?
Well, I was asking you to raise your hand, but since you unmuted, why don't
Okay,
you go
can you
ahead,
see
Gail?
my hand?
Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Yes, I do use Tupperware, but the problem is Tupperware is very good for storage. How do we get around that? For instance, I like to store pasta. Well, you try and find a glass jar you can store spaghetti in.
Yeah, that is a fantastic question because I, like I mentioned, I also used to always use plastic storage containers for a lot of my food. But I think what our recent study really highlights is that there's a lot of issues on what chemicals are not being regulated in the United States. And basically, to kind of paint the picture as to why we're concerned about storage containers is because I kind of mentioned this kind of quickly in the main part of this presentation, but there's an issue of contamination that's going on right now that our study highlights of electronic waste recycling. And so we know that electronic enclosures, like the television casings that are made of black plastic, have intentionally added flame retardant chemicals that are known to be harmful to human health. And studies in other countries outside of the United States have actually been finding that black plastic household items that touch our food or that our kids play with are actually having these same flame retardants that are added to the electronic
Mhm.
enclosures in them. And so we did this study in the United States because we realized that a study in the US hasn't been done yet on food contact materials. And we saw that our household products like kitchen utensils and food serviceware items were being in toys were being contaminated with harmful flame retardants to health. And that's very much a result of electronic waste recycling. And so it's essentially like that same plastic with flame retardants from our electronics is winding up in some of our household items, like things that touch our food, like our kitchen utensils, or we had really high levels in a sushi tray. So it definitely generates concern around what materials are touching our food. And so it's really hard because, again, I don't think the answer, again, is to shop our way out of the problem, because a lot of times it's expensive and you can't expect everyone to be able to buy glass when they can. But if it's possible, it will definitely help reduce any potential exposures to the potential additives that are in plastic, because again, we know that plastic beyond flame retardants has a bunch of other different kind of additives in them. Um, and so that's kind of where my mind goes with that. And so if you can avoid it, I think it would be best. But if you really can't, I think just keeping in mind that heat can help ease migration of chemicals out of the products they're in. So if you can at least maybe wait to see if your food cools down a little bit before you put it into something that is going to sit in for a while, I think that's a good way to go about it if you aren't ready to switch to glass. And so I think that would be kind of the first step that I would take if you're starting to think about ways to minimize potential exposure from plastic containers.
Another point would be not to use them to microwave anything.
Definitely. It's a very good point.
So don't use Tupperware plates, which is what I always use, by the way. Plastic plates that say they're microwave safe. Well, what would you use then for a plate to microwave something?
I just make sure to not use anything plastic. That's really my goal. All my
Mm.
dishware, I don't microwave anything plastic ever because for that same reason that you just mentioned is the heat. It's hard though, because I think too, like frozen foods are often contained in like plastic. And so, if you can do your best to reduce how much you might be eating food off of plastic, I try to practice like maybe if I have some frozen food that I'm eating like a quick meal with, I'll try and shift it onto like a ceramic plate or whatever dishware I had that's not plastic, and microwave it there instead. But yeah, it's definitely
My
kind of
my co- my concern is always not to blow up the microwave. So, Chris had a question. Are you able to read the chat, Megan?
I would need to stop sharing my screen, I believe. Is that
Okay, you can
possible?
stop sharing your screen if you'd like.
Fantastic. Just opening the chat. Okay, so Chris, what technological advances will help us clean more safely as we move into the future? Oh, that is a good question. And have you explored aqueous ozone as a disinfectant and cleaner that is simply water and electricity? So, to address your second part of that question, I am not as knowledgeable about aqueous ozone as a disinfectant. So, my expertise doesn't lay there. So, I'm not really sure what the answer is to that. As to technological advances that can help clean more safely, kind of where my mind goes to is because I know we're kind of on the topic of recycling. There are ways to have policies that regulate what kind of chemicals and materials are entering the waste recycling stream, and that could ultimately help protect us from having chemicals in products made with recycled content. Um, I don't know if I'm directly answering that question though. Feel free to like let me know if you have any clarifications. But something else too that I would say here in terms of like how we do things more safely as we move into the future, I think really again comes back down to the need for restrictions on toxic chemicals because again, these shouldn't even be in the environment in the first place. And we have safer alternatives to a lot of these chemicals as is. And so that ultimately is going to be what protects us in the future. Yeah,
I think that's answering Chris's question.
perfect.
Thumbs up. Okay. How would we get a hold of your retailer report card?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the best way would be to sign up for our newsletter. We'll definitely be sending out notifications once it's posted. That will be sometime this fall. So that would definitely be the best way to keep in touch with that.
And to sign up for your newsletter, could you give us that tip on how to do that?
Yes, so you can do that by going to the toxicfreefuture.org website. However, I will also copy the link to signing up into the chat so that you can all just copy and paste it. So adding that right now. Okay. So that's in the chat now. And yeah.
Perfect. I have one other question, and that is Teflon. Teflon coated baking trays, for instance, to bake cookies. Seems like a nice activity. What are your thoughts on that?
Definitely avoid things with Teflon if you can. Again, we know that Teflon can contain PFAS because it's a non-stick material. And PFAS is, I'm sure you all are familiar, such a notorious chemical that's harmful to humans. It's harmful for the environment. It's really dangerous. And so we don't want to have anything that's touching the food we're going to eat that might be, contaminated or not contaminated, but have PFAS in them. So yeah, I would definitely stay away from those if you can and try not to use Teflon coated cookware at all.
Okay, thank you so much for answering that. Carol, did you have a question? Okay, Gail, did you have another question? Okay, I'm not seeing another question. Gail, you're not, Gail, you're muted still.
And don't use the antimicrobials, use Everclear. That is a very strong alcohol.
And what are you suggesting using that for?
Instead for sanitizing, instead of the antimicrobials. You don't have any of the harmful. It's pure alcohol, and so it's safer than the a lot of the cleaning products that they have that sanitize.
What are your thoughts on that, Megan?
I am personally not familiar with Everclear. I'll have to look into it more.
You, by the way, you find it in your local liquor store.
Oh, wow.
It's a very strong alcohol. You, not a drinking alcohol, but some idiots do use it.
My
But
only thought,
it does clean without the antimicrobials.
my only thought on that is if it's mixed with some sort of sweetener.
No, it's not. Believe me, it's not. It's pure.
Ah, okay.
The only people who want to drink it are people who just want to get an excessive high.
I see. Okay, thanks for that suggestion, Gail. I really appreciate you being here tonight, Megan. You've given us such great information on household items that we can look for and replace to, with something safer. Definitely glass for storage as opposed to plastic
Exactly.
Tupperware. And also tips on, using aluminum, using ceramic, stainless steel kitchen utensils, wooden. Wood has always been a safe, component for, and it still is, and it's classic. It goes with everything. Does anyone have any further questions? Or Megan, do you have anything you'd like to add that we haven't asked you?
I think we've covered it, but if anyone here has any questions, my email was on that last slide. I'll also plug it into the chat here in case anyone wants to reach out after and has any other questions that comes up. I'm happy to get back to you over email. But no, yeah, thank you all so much for being here. It was really fun, and I hope it was informative and not too concerning. I think, again, it's, hard not to, create fear when you think about all the different toxic chemicals that are out there, but, kind of why I, like to show what policy and market change is being done. And again, there's a lot of things that we can do to keep ourselves safe. So yeah, thanks all so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Megan.
I think we all learned a lot from your presentation, and it was short and sweet, but it was very informative.
Perfect.
Thank you again.
Great. Thank you all.